everybody, so our theme for this year is Sustainable Community Schools Defend, Transform Public Education. Every year we have national and international speakers helping us to think more deeply about our teaching and organizing. This year we felt that we have national and international leaders right here in our community. Coming off the 34-day hunger strike, let's give a round of applause to our education movement who has accomplished where we go and where we're from right now. So thank you for those.
So we want to bring up Dr. Monique Redeaux-Smith. I met Monique on the west side of Chicago in 2007. I don't know if she remembers this, when I was a student teacher at Dvorak Elementary School. And she was on the 3rd floor with the 8th graders, and I came in there crazy. But I learned a lot from her. And over the years, I've grown to know Monique a lot more closely. She was a member of the Coalition to Revitalize Diet High School, a hunger striker. She's a proud member of the CTU, where mighty CTU at in the house. She's a mother, and more importantly, she's an educational activist. And today, her piece titled Countering the Attack on Youth of Color is really trying to put together some pieces of the puzzle that may not have been put together for folks. So I want to encourage you to listen very closely. And let's really try to put some of this work into motion when you leave Kenwood today. Don't pack it up, put it in your book bag, and leave it on your shelf. Put it in action, right? So let's really live and breathe the work that we do and we learn about today. All right, so without further ado, Dr. Monique Redeaux-Smith.
Good morning. I'm honored to be speaking before you today. I'm always honored to be at the curriculum fair because I've been a teacher for 11 years in CPS, and I've been to quite a few professional developments that I felt were a waste of my time. And so I always love coming to the fair because I get to be with real educators who teach children who look like the children in my classroom, and I'm able to take back real tools and strategies on Monday back to my classroom. So again, I'm honored to be among you. So I want to just start our conversation by talking about a conversation I overheard a month ago by a group of teachers. And they were discussing whether or not they should be involved in this work. And by this work, I mean the work of creating and developing critical and social just curricula and pedagogy. Now, they weren't saying that they shouldn't be doing it in their classrooms. They knew that, but they just were saying, you know, we have so much on our plate. We're dealing with so much. We're fighting this corporate reform movement. We're fighting administrators in our building. We're fighting for a new contract. And so maybe we can leave, you know, creating socially just curricula up to people who are already doing this work, up to people like Teachers for Social Justice and Rethinking Schools, people who are doing this work quite well. And I just think in that conversation, those teachers were missing a couple really important points. First, that the most important facets of any movement, any grassroots movement that is organizing. And we as teachers should be organizers. We should be thinking of ourselves as organizers. And a key piece of being an organizer is also education, because the education is how you get people to move. So here's the second thing I think that those teachers were kind of missing out on, is that we should not only be thinking of ourselves as organizers, but as organizers who are trying to not only build a movement, but sustain a movement. Because the power of any movement is in its sustainability. And when we engage in socially just pedagogy and curricula, when we're educating and organizing our youth, that is how we are sustaining this movement, because the youth, this is how we're going to move this movement to the next level. The youth are the ones who are going to advance this work with fearlessness. And we're going to need fearlessness, brothers and sisters, because this corporate enemy that we are fighting, they are on an all-out attack against youth of color. And they are seeking to destroy, consume Black and brown youth. this is total warfare. You know, total warfare was a concept brought by the Europeans to the Americas, the idea that you use whatever tactic, whatever strategy you can to destroy everything. You spare nothing. This is what we're dealing with. This war on our youth, it is all-encompassing. It is physical, it is psychic, it is emotional, it is psychological. You know, sometimes it's hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that people will intentionally harm children. We just can't really wrap our minds around that. But while we were starving for 34 days, you know, that idea kind of, it became more real to me, that this is an all-out war on our youth. And especially as people who have dedicated our lives to working with youth, we kind of have a trouble with wrapping our minds around the fact that people will intentionally harm children. But we must understand and be very clear that this system of corporate privatization of all that is public, it is a scheme and a ploy to protect and strengthen white supremacy and the status quo. And its main target is youth of color and any and all people, organizations, institutions that will seek to protect these children. If this is not total war against our children, how else can you explain a police force that has been blatantly held unaccountable for physical deaths and murders of dozens of unarmed young people like Tamir Rice and Rakia Boyd? How can you explain food deserts in one of the richest cities in the world, in the richest countries in the world, neighborhoods that have zero grocery stores or healthy food options for their residents, many of whom are small children? Not only do they create food deserts physically, but they also make sure to deny access to quality food options by refusing to provide livable wages for workers who have families and young children. Try making less than $15 a day and going to Whole Foods or going to your local grocery store and shopping organically for a family of 5. You try it. Billion-dollar companies making money, billions of dollars on the cheap black, brown, and immigrant labor, but deny livable wages to those workers. And then those privatizers attempt to suffocate the silence of the cries of those workers by making sure they have no labor unions or any kind of institution that would actually protect the rights of those workers. Not only are some of our neighborhoods in food deserts, though, brothers and sisters, we have schools, we have neighborhoods that are actually in the midst of school deserts, rendering the community not only helpless in providing and nourishing the bodies of their young people, but also the minds of their young people. How can you explain closing dozens of schools in the same neighborhood, disrupting the lives of young people so that babies who are 8 and 9 years old have been uprooted and sent to 4 and 5 different schools? And then the schools that they're sent to are overcrowded and destabilized, where teachers with experience with working with those communities that these students are come from and knowledge to actually help these children have been pushed out, so that the only familiar faces that these children see are the armed officers and police who patrol the perimeters of the school. If this is not a strategic war on our youth, how can you explain leaving the education of our children to interns, so-called teachers who have no training in the development of children, who have no understanding of the community dynamics in which they work, who are literally learning as they go? And what's worse is the ones who are making policy have this same 0 years of experience or training and education. Would they allow interns with 5 weeks of experience to make decisions and deals for a Fortune 500 company? No. But they have such low regard for our young people that this is not only a practice that's accepted, it's encouraged. How do you explain a government of elected officials allowing parents and grandparents to starve for 34 days because they want to do right by the children in their neighborhood? They want the children in their neighborhood to have access to a quality education in their neighborhood. If this is not an attack on our youth, how can you explain removing trauma centers and hospitals from neighborhoods which experience some of the highest mortality and homicide rates in the city? How do you explain taking resources away from special education children, autistic children, preschool children with HIV and AIDS? This is the evil, brothers and sisters, that we are dealing with. This system is seeking to psychologically, if not physically, devour our children because they understand that the young people will be the ones who carry on this work. They are the ones who will continue to push this work forward. So the training and educating of our youth is vital to this movement. And it's why those corporate deformers seek to sabotage and destroy public education and any who would wish to protect it. Because a population that is politically unaware and uneducated and lacks a critical consciousness is a compliant and easily controlled population. Why else would they in ed policy be going against every best practice, every legitimate piece of ed research, and yet keep funneling out failed policy after failed policy? If this is not about the purposeful sabotage of public education and of our children, why would you create policies to standardize and to test babies, 3- and 4-year-olds, preschool children, to test their college and career readiness? Early childhood expert Nancy Carlson-Page, she asked this poignant question. She said, if we take play, social interaction, and experimentation out of our schools, what kind of people are we producing? Not those with as much imagination, creativity, individual thinking, or original ideas. And isn't this precisely the point? If your goal is to maintain a two-tier society with systems of race and class privilege, wouldn't it make sense to snuff out any kind of individual thinking, any kind of creativity or originality? And since this is innate in children, they seek to snuff it out before it could ever take root. Because let's just think for a second about what might happen if we had young black and brown people with imagination, creativity, and critical understanding. They might do things like be voices in Chicago education and push legislators and politicians to pass laws that stop and change the punitive push-out system of discipline in our schools and instead restore justice and humanity to our students. Critical and creative young people might push presidential candidates to actually address the taboo topic of racial inequities in America and affirm that black lives do indeed matter. You see, these young independent thinkers might gather en masse in the streets of downtown, or they might walk out of their classrooms to protest budget cuts to their education. They might charge genocide and fearlessly hold the police accountable for the brutality that they exact upon black and brown bodies. You see, young people with imagination and original ideas, they might band together on college campuses and recognize their powers as scholars and athletes and bring down racist leaders in their Ivy League towers. They might unite with parents and teachers across the country and refuse to be sorted and ranked, but instead lead the largest opt-out movement in the history of standardized testing. You see, that's what an educated and critically literate youth population could do. I recently went to a meeting regarding the new Diet high school that will be an open, public, open enrollment high school thanks to my family and the community of Bronzeville. But in a very typical and disingenuous fashion, CPS has still tried to silence the voice of the Bronzeville community and has made the high school with an arts focus, which is not what the community has asked for. But at that meeting with the CPS appointed leader of the school, I kept hearing constant talk about how an art-focused school would attract young people. And that phrase and ideology kept coming up again and again to the point where I felt disrespected. Because the unsaid assumption was that black and brown youth only care about their Facebook and Instagram pages and that they only care about whipping and nay-naying, and so that's what we have to attract them with in order to get them to come to school. As if a school with an academic focus on challenging their minds and equipping them to be critical thinkers and world leaders wouldn't be attractive enough. But you see, this disrespects our students and it completely ignores the work and critically important work that these students are doing, not just here in Chicago, but across the country. They label our students as at risk, but the truth is that this current system of racism and white supremacy is at risk of crumbling when we have an educated, critically literate youth population. So it's our responsibility as educators and organizers to continually fortify and sustain this movement every day that we are in our classrooms, every day that we are before young people. We must organize and work alongside our youth so that they are fully armed and prepared to defend and transform public education. I'll end with one of my favorite quotes. It's by Frederick Douglass. It's in my classroom. And it says, "It is not the light that is needed, but the fire. It is not the gentle shower, but the thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake." Yes, brothers and sisters, we are the fire. We come here to strengthen and reignite our blaze. We are the storm and the earthquake, because this is earth-shaking work that we must do in order to rock these racist, classist, patriarchal systems of oppression to their core. It is not time to comply. It is not the time to be quiet. As the young people say, it is time to turn up. It's time to turn up the heat of this movement. It's time to turn up our demands for justice. We must turn up our voices so that they rumble like deafening thunder, so loud that it is impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss. The time is now. The time is now. So let's get to work.